this gets real old because this is our life now at VMRC. This is what we do practically all day. We're on these kind of things, sometimes 3-4 times a day. So, but I appreciate you all coming today and listening in. This work group was formed as a result of we took some information to the FMAC a couple of years ago saying that ASMSC was starting to look at Spot and Croaker, and they were seeing the numbers were going down, and there was discussion about what to do about that. And so that's been going on for a couple of years. We knew that if things continued, because of the way the plan was, if things continued, that we would have to put, there would be management actions that would be required. So we met in April of 2019 was the only time we met, and we met before an FMAC meeting, and we had a very productive meeting, I thought, and we were going to follow that up. But then we had a lot of striped bass issues towards the end of the second half of 2019, which was pretty much occupying all our time. And I kept telling folks, I said, we're going to have to put it off until 2020. And then by March of 2020, we all know what happened, and we've been in exile ever since, working from home. So, but ASMSC has moved forward. We have met the triggers that are going to require us to do some management action. So, and that's why we're meeting today. We have to submit a plan to them by the 15th of February. And on what we're going to do. And I chaired the Croaker and Spot were what was called the South Atlantic State and Federal Fisheries Management Board. They have now split that out into, I think it's called the Cyanid group, which is the drums, Croaker, Spot, Weakfish. No, that's Croaker, Spot, Black Drum, Red Drum, and Spot Sea Trout, and they cook cobia and Spanish mackerel in a coastal migratory management group. So they split them out because there were too many species in there, and it ended up that it was hard to dedicate a lot of time in those meetings. So they split them up just last meeting, I think is what it was. So, but in those meetings that we've had, when I was chairing the committee was, the Croaker numbers and the Spot numbers in some areas have been steadily going down, and everyone's wondering what's going on. Most states do not have any regulations on them, so the thought was, let's put some sidebars on this. Let's put some binders on the side of this fishery, so that we can see what's going on with it, because we weren't really sure what was happening. But the numbers were going dramatically down, and Summers is going to show that with the data we have today. And so the primary reason for us meeting today is she's going to present the information from the technical committees and from the Croaker and Spot group that have met through the South Atlantic Board. We're going to ask for your input. There are some, ASMSC has minimum mandates that we'll have to apply. We can be more liberal, more conservative if we want to be on that. So we'll discuss that as we move forward. We'll need to develop brand new regulations for these two species. So staff have already been working on that. There is no implementation date yet, as far as I know, from ASMSC. We'll probably get that from them at the February meeting, which is the first week in February. So we're trying to push this forward. We want to try to get it done. If before the start of the season, we don't, an implementation date in the middle of the season might be kind of hard, like, July 1 or something like that might be a little difficult if that's what ASMSC puts out to us. But we want to try to move this forward, not at rapid speed, but we want to continue moving forward, and staff have been working on it pretty continuously, for the last six months to a year. So that's where we're standing right now. And I think right now we're hoping to take it before the commission in March, I think is our plan. And so that's where we stand with this. And I welcome everybody today, and I thank you for your input on this. And it's been a long time in getting back together, but I'm looking forward to a very productive 90 minutes of discussion on this. So at this time, I mean, we have everybody on I know Chris Ledford is on the line. Eddie Brady's not going to be here. Is Mead on the line yet? Mead Amory?
Hey, Pat, I'm going to actually test this call-in user. I think it might be Mead, so hold on just a second.
Okay.
Okay, Mead, is that you that I've got unmuted?
Yes, I'm on the line.
Excellent.
All right, well, welcome, Mead.
Thanks.
Did Scott Bloxham ever join us?
He did not, no.
He did not. All right, and then Scott McDonald is here. Tom Powers is here. Is anyone else on the work group here?
Nope.
Is it here?
No.
Just those four.
That's it?
Yeah.
Just those four, okay. All right, at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Summer Smots, who's been, she's our representative on the Spot Croaker TC, and she's going to give you a presentation on, you've seen some of these graphs before. I know they're busy, but, you know, just take a look at them, and, you know, once you figure these graphs out, they're pretty easy to follow. So, Summers, you have control at this point.
Okay. All right. So welcome to the second task force meeting. I was not at the first one, but I'm here now. Okay, why aren't you going? There we go. Okay. So as a reminder, Croaker and Spot use the traffic light approach. So data poor fisheries can use TLAs in place of stock assessments. These assign a color, red, yellow, or green, to categorize the condition of the fish population, which is the abundance metric, or the fishery itself, which is the harvest metric. If there's an increased red on the TLA, that means that the data are declining from a long-term mean based on a reference period. And both the abundance metric and the harvest metric must trigger to solicit a management response. The harvest metric is coastwide harvest based on commercial and recreational landings, and then the abundance metric is based on fishery independent surveys. So like CMAP, CHESMAP, and NEMAP. And then each trigger level has an associated management measure that states must implement, like Pat was saying. So again, like he was saying, these are very busy. So first we have Atlantic Croaker. So this is just the harvest composite, the fishery dependent data. And you can see right here that it's tripped and it's split out regionally. That was a newer thing that's been added to the FMP, the Fishery Management Plan. So the Mid-Atlantic has tripped at 30% for it has to be at least 3 of the 4 most recent years, and you can see that's, this is the 30% line right here, and then this is the 60% line. And then in the South Atlantic, it is also tripped at the past 3 out of the 4 most recent years. And then this is the fishery independent composite. So this is the trawl surveys. So again, this is tripping at 30%. Here's that line. You will notice that there's not a 2019 data point, and that's because of some COVID issues. They had some trouble getting samples together and ready by the time, but even without that data point, this region is still tripping at 30% because it's the 3 out of the 4 years. And you'll notice that the South Atlantic region is not tripping at 30%, but because the Mid-Atlantic is, that means that overall this abundance composite is tripping. And then moving on to Spot. So Spot has a little bit of a different time frame. You look at 2 out of the 3 most recent years. So for the harvest composite, the fishery dependent data, you can see here that it's the 3 most recent years. 2 out of the 3 most recent years have to trip at that 30%. And then the South Atlantic, it's definitely tripped at 30%. And then again, the abundance composite, which is the fishery independent data, there's not a 2019 data point, but 2 out of the 3 most recent years are past that 30% level. South Atlantic is the same idea as the Croaker, where it did not trip, but since this one did altogether, this is definitely at that 30% level. So addendums for both species were passed during the ASMFC February 2020 meeting with plans for management if the species tripped at either the 30% level or that 60% level. And then in 2019, both species did trip at 30%, which means according to both addendums, states must implement at minimum a recreational bag limit of 50 fish for both species, and commercial measures that result in a reduction of a 1% reduction to average landings from the previous 10 years. The addendums, which we'll talk about this as a group, but the addendums also allow charter captains to use the number of customers allowed on the vessel multiplied by the bag limit for live bait. The final decision on that language will be made by the commission at the meeting in March, which I think you had said, Pat, March 2021. So as a reminder, these tables show the percentage of affected trips and the resulting reduction from the different bag limit options. So this is obviously recreational. Both species have a 50 fish bag limit at the 30% management level and a 40 fish bag limit at the 60% management level. So just to go through this a little bit, at 50 fish, you're only affecting 0.8% of the trips, but you're getting a 2.4% reduction for croaker. And then for spot, you're affecting 2.2% of the trips at 50 fish, and you're getting a 9.3% reduction. And then, just to prepare you for the coming conversations, here's a graph of the croaker commercial harvest from 2009 to 2019 by month and by year. And we can go back and reference this when we talk about seasons later. And then this is the same idea.
Can you go back 1 second? This is what years?
2009 to 2019.
So there was a substantial reduction between 2009 and 2019. We should be looking at the last 2 or 3 years. I know that's not what the plan says, and I complained about that in the advisory panel.
Right, yeah, the plan does say the previous 10 years, so that's what we've been using.
In that case, you can give the commercial sector a 30% increase over what they've done the last 3 or 4 years. Is that right? I'm not asking if that's correct. I'm asking if that's the right thing to do.
How about we get through the presentation and then we can address some of those concerns when we get to the discussion portion. Is that okay? Okay.
Sure.
Okay. So now we're going to go through the process of how staff found that 1% reduction in harvest in the commercial fisheries for both species. And first, we're going to look at croaker. So we took harvest reports from 2009 to 2019 for croaker harvested in state waters, summed the harvest by year for all 10 years, and then took the average to get the reduction needed. So the overall average for croaker was 3.8 million pounds. And then the resulting reductions, the 1% and the 5%, are here. And then in order to find a reduction, we need to be able to take away days with harvest. And as many of you probably know, there is a problem with the flood of data on the first of the month because of our mandatory harvest reporting program for our commercial fisheries. So in order to get past this problem, we created a trip variable with MRCID year, month, and day, summed pounds by trip and months to not double count the harvest over the 10 years, and then took a monthly sum and divided by the number of days in the month to get an average per day. So using this data, we created this quote-unquote dummy year with these averages per day throughout the year. So for croaker in February, we're saying it has 28 days. This is the monthly poundage, and then you divide that to get a pounds per day. And then you use this to make a year, and then you can take reductions by days. So here are the resulting seasons with the reductions. There is an option to take the cut from both the beginning and the end of the year, or just the beginning or just the end of the year. And as I said before, we're only required to take that 1% reduction per ASMFC. So just to explain this a little bit, at the beginning of the year, that means that the season would not open until March 2nd. And if we took it at the end, that means the season would close November 8th. And they'd be open on either side. And then if you took it from both, then opens and closes. Okay, so the same process, exact same process with spot. So we took the harvest reports from 2009 to 2019, summed the harvest by year for all 10 years, and took the average to get the reduction. For spot, it was a lot lower than Croaker, 1.7 million pounds. And then the FMP is a little bit different. So at the 60% threshold, there's a 10% cut required as opposed to the Croaker 5%. But here's that 1% and 10% here. So we have the same problem with the flood of the data on the first of the month. So we created that trip variable, sum by pounds in month, and then took the monthly sum and divided by the number of days in the month to get an average per day. And again, created this dummy year with averages per day throughout the year. So again, in February, spot, we're saying it has 20 days. Spot has 2,540 pounds, and that equals out to 91 pounds per day. And then we were able to take reduction by days by expanding this out into a year. And again, here are the resulting seasons with the reductions. There is an option to take the cut from both the beginning and the end, or just the beginning and just the end. And again, it's just that 1% that's required. So if you took it from the beginning, it wouldn't open until May 2nd, and if you took it from the end, it would close November 29th. So here's that side-by-side comparison of the two species and the season options. In order to avoid any lagging days in the middle of the year where one species is closed and the other is open, staff is recommending to take that Atlantic Croaker cut from the beginning of the year and spot from the end of the year. So for example, if we went with the 1%, we would not open Croaker until March 2nd, and that was where we'd get that 1% for Croaker, and then we would close spot on November 29th. So we'd get that 1% for spot. Okay, so the commercial reduction and recreational reduction as it stands, they're not equitable. So at the 50 fish bag limit, which is that 30% threshold, Croaker has a 2.4 reduction and spot has a 9.3 reduction, but commercially the only reduction required is a 1%. And then at the 60% threshold, which is the 40 fish bag limit, Croaker has a 3.4% reduction and spot has a 12.7 reduction, where commercially the reduction required is 5% for Croaker and 10% for spot. So as such, we wanted to present you with some season options that give equitable reductions. So this is the same table at the top, but this bottom part is looking at Croaker at a 50 fish bag limit, which the reduction would be 2.4%. So instead of the season opening March 2nd, it would open March 4th. And then this is at a 40 fish bag limit, so that's the 3.4% reduction. Instead of opening March 2nd, it would open March 5th. And we can always go back, we're gonna probably go back and look at all of these again, so don't feel like you have to memorize all of these numbers because it's a lot. Oops. And then for spot, this is that 50 fish bag limit for spot is the 9.3% reduction. So again, at the bottom, that's a 9.3. So obviously this is a little bit more impactful than the Croaker differences. So instead of closing November 29th, you'd close November 4th. So you'd lose most of that month of November. And then at the 60% level, the reduction for spot is 12.7%, and it would close October 31st instead of November 29th. So you're losing that whole month of November. So in conclusion, before we get to our decision point slides, staff is recommending that we take reductions from the beginning of the year for Croaker and at the end of the year for spot, like I had said, so there's not a closed season in between them. Again, just to reiterate, only that 1% and 50 fish bag limit are all that are required by ASMFC at this time. And staff has also explored doing this by gear type, but it is difficult to do since the gear is not overly selective for either fish. So we can talk more about that, but to our decision point slide. So As a task force, you can provide guidance by voting on decision points for us to bring forward at that commission meeting in March. So the first thing we'll talk about is bag limits. We know there was talking about implementing a smaller bag limit than what was required by ASMFC. But do note that if either species trips at a higher management level in the future, we may have to implement additional lower bag limits. So just open up the floor to the committee, or I guess not the committee, the task force on bag limits first. Just kind of get your discussion on that and then get some numbers down.
One of the bag limits we talked about before was 25 or 30 fish. How did that not make it to the list?
It can be. That's the will of the task force.
If that's your decision, yes, you can bring that forward and people can discuss it and vote on it.
Guess you went with the 50 or 40 because that covers the 1% we have to. That's why you worked up those numbers.
Yeah, so the 50 fish is what is the minimum that's required by ASMFC right now at the 30% management level. So that's, we have to do that at least. And then the 40 fish is at the 60% management level. That will be required then.
So that basically gives a 9.3. Is that what it was back on that slide? A 9.3% reduction.
Yeah, we can go back.
So that really covers what needs to be done, correct?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yes, you're talking recreationally. Yeah. So the bag limits are, I wouldn't say they're like set in stone for ASMFC. Like they have in the FMP, it says 50 fish bag limit, and then 40 fish if it's at the 60% management level.
Right.
But as Pat says, we can always be, what's the word?
More conservative.
More conservative. Could not think of the word.
Right.
Well,
and to be clear, those percentages, so the associated percentages for the recreational 50 fish bag limit, that's not anything that is required by ASMFC. The bag limit itself is what's required by ASMFC. So what we've done here is we've tried to figure out what the associated percentage reduction is for the state of Virginia. They're forcing the coast to take a 50 fish bag limit. This is Virginia specific.
Yeah.
So what Summers is showing you here is for the state of Virginia, if we took a 50 fish bag limit, which is what we have to do, required by ASMFC, or again, we can be more conservative, but if we take that 50 fish bag limit, for Croaker, that equates to a 2.4% reduction recreationally, and for Spot, a 9.3% reduction recreationally. So what we've done with this equitable cut scenario is show you that commercially, ASMFC is only making the commercial guys take a 1% reduction, but if we take that 50 fish bag limit, which we have to do at that 30% threshold, recreationally, they're actually taking a 2.4% cut and a 9.3% cut, depending on the species.
So there's really no sense in doing anything different. We've covered what we need to cover.
Yep.
Yeah.
Pretty much in a nutshell.
100%, yes. So the 50% bag, the 50 fish bag limit is what we have to take at the 30% threshold for the recreational fishery.
Okay.
At the 30% threshold for commercial, we only have to take a 1% reduction. However, we have heard that that's inequitable because the recreational group is actually taking a larger percent reduction than the commercial is. So this task force has the leeway to say, we would rather you take an equitable cut, or the task force can say, no, we want to stick with that 1% commercial reduction.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, 1% commercial reduction. Like I said, we've taken just by the fish being gone. My dock alone has taken a 99% cut on croakers. So we don't pack them anymore. So we've already, equitable cut we've already taken, as far as, from a gill net standpoint. So.
I'll echo what Scott's saying too. One thing that seems to have been overlooked on this is the trawlers and the amount of fish the trawlers landed, 6, 7, 8, 9 years ago. And if you close the season commercially or don't open it until March, you've eliminated a traditional trawl fishery. I mean, they're not doing it now, and they haven't done it for the last 3 or 4 years because the fish haven't been there. And, or they've been very small and they've stayed away from them for that reason. So, you implement this and then croakers come back in another year or two. How quick can you change this and adapt it?
So that's, I wrote that down. Per the FMP, so for croaker, the management measures have to be in place for at least 3 years. And if 4 years pass and it's still exceeding that threshold, then the TC has to meet and reevaluate what's happening. Mm-hmm. If it's below the threshold, then we could remove management measures. And then for spot, since it's obviously a faster cycling species, that only the management measures for spot only have to be in place for 2 years. And then if 3 years pass and it's still at the threshold, again, the TC will evaluate them again.
Well, trawlers don't target spot. They never have. It's not really a trawl fishery, but the croakers, it can be a big trawl fishery. And considering how they've landed millions of pounds in years past and they've landed none in the last few years, what you're doing, though, with this start time for croakers in March is you're pretty much eliminating that fishery if it comes back. If it, I have a problem with that. I need to think about another way to do it possibly.
So also, if what you're saying is true, let me rephrase it. Based on what you're saying,
thank you.
Since the averages that they're doing are for the 10-year average, then they're overcounting what the current harvest is early in the season, and moving that start date doesn't do anything because it cuts out a fishery that doesn't exist now that has existed previously in the 10 years and was a substantial harvest. Can you go back to your harvest by month for the commercial fishery?
Yeah, see, that kind of brings up a point. This is the basis for the reduction by calendar days. Mm. Is that March data there really? Actually, they don't even have trawl nets here.
It might be. So we had to obviously deal with confidentiality with these graphs, so it might be grouped into other. But the other thing is, so we only looked at state harvest, and at times trawl is not included in state harvest. That would be federal harvest. Well,
so if it's harvested in federal waters, it's landed in the state. If we're closed and a guy catches this stuff in federal waters, can he not unload here in Virginia? And if Virginia implements this and the guy's catching it out here by the light tower, he's going to have to steam down to Carolina or go up to New Jersey to unload?
Depending on what their seasons end up being. I don't know what the other states are going to do.
I don't want to throw out a lot of problems here, and it's kind of the one thing. The trawl fishermen have stopped fishing for them because they're not out there in abundance, and the ones that are really small. So they're in effect managing it themselves without any, restrictions or out any outline from management to tell them you can't catch this, you can't land this now. They're doing it based on what's right for the fish and, the economics of it too. Don't get me wrong, if they could get $2 a pound for a real small croaker, they'd go catch it. but it's managing itself. When the fish come back, then they'll go catch it again. But the one concern I would have, if they do come back and we're stuck and we can't land them in Virginia, and they're still going to catch them and land them in Carolina or Jersey, where they don't have these limits, that's going to be a problem. And that might not happen. It might be 10 years before they bounce back.
Right. So everybody has to take a cut along the coast. That's required by the FMP. So I'm not, again, we're just not sure what the seasons are going to end up looking like for other states if that's what they opt to do to take their 1% cut. And well, it sounds like from the
how does that work in Jersey where they've really never had any croaker landings?
I don't know. I don't know what their
just curious. I mean,
yeah, I'm not sure what theirs is going to look like, to be honest with you.
But they still have to take 1%.
They still have to take a cut.
They have to figure out that 1% just like we do.
Okay.
So the 1%, when I read the fisheries management plan, it was a 1% reduction for the average of the 10-year harvest.
Yeah.
Okay. So are we taking a 1% cut from the average landings, which is on the order of, looking at that graph, 6 million pounds? Or are we taking an average cut from the average landings for the last 3 years, which, looking at the data, is on the order of a few million pounds?
We have to take it over the course of 10 years. That's what's in the FMP.
No, that's what the FMP says. But so again, we're back to this concept. What is your target landings for next year with the reductions that you're talking about for the commercial sector?
Hold on, we're getting there.
Are you asking for croaker specifically, or?
Yeah, just let's start with that one.
Should be in the presentation, right?
I just have the reduction. I don't have the stuff from the amount.
I see where you're going here with this, Tom, because if we take it over the last 10 years, if it's an average over 10 years, we need 1%. We're currently doing that. Just like me just said with the troll boats, the gill netters. I used to have boats that gill netted here in February and March, and then again in September, November for croaker that don't do it anymore. So 5 years ago we did, the past 5 we haven't. So we're essentially already reduced by a lot more than 1%. If our average landings over 10 years have been 6 million pounds and we're only landing 2 million pounds a year now, then we've already reduced by 60%, 66%.
And it's worse than that. The average landings were I just downloaded the data. 5.5 billion pounds for the last 10 years. Or no, wait a minute. I got one extra year. There you go. 4.9, so 5 million pounds. And the last year we did 560,000.
So there you go. We're already in compliance.
But the problem is that I worry about the weak fish problem.
There's a lot of weak fish.
Yeah, now finally, but there's still, you can't keep any. But the point is that the weak fish fishery collapsed, and all the management was 5 years behind the collapse. And if we don't take some reductions here, then we're doing something wrong here. And you can argue over what it is, but what we can fix is reductions in harvest. Unless we can shut down the shrimp trawl fishery in North Carolina.
So to answer your question, using this slide, you can just take this overall average and subtract, this is that 1% cut that you'd have to take. So it's about 3.7. million pounds.
So where did you get these numbers?
It's from our harvest.
Okay, because I just downloaded the number from NIMS or NOAA, and all of them are like 2 million pounds more at the low end.
So remember, we're looking at just state water harvest.
Okay.
That might be the difference.
Definitely the difference if you're pulling it from NIMS.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is our
specific
reporting.
data, yeah, from our mandatory harvest reporting program.
But do you
It's
see
no longer available.
But do you see where I'm coming from? We've already, if we've got to take a 1% cut over 6 million, we're in a cut. We're taking a cut. We're in compliance.
That's true, and so is the recreational fishery because the harvest is so far down. But
Correct.
The recreational fishery is not counted for the last 10-year average. Recreational fishery is just put some limits on, which is effectively from last year's averages.
Right, and
when you did the recreational calculations for percentage reduction, what numbers did you use for that? And how does that compare with it? And how does the 10-year trend on that one go?
Sorry, will you repeat your first question?
When you do the reduction percentages for recreational, what years did you use for the MRFIS, I guess it was dockside intercepts, to come up with those numbers?
So those are actually completed by the PDT and the TC for us. I did not do those, but they did use 2009 through 2019 as well.
So again, that's not the real reduction that we're taking. And I'm worried that this is a blue collar bread and butter fishery, and it's collapsed or is collapsing, and the reductions you're taking based on 10 years worth of data do not take into account the fact that the fishery is just falling apart.
So I guess my question to you then, are you implying that we should take a greater cut?
Probably. I think you should look at the data. You should look at the MRIP dockside intercept percentage, distribution function, and look at the last 3 years or 4 years, and the same thing with the commercial sector. Look at the last 3 or 4 years and do our cuts based on where the fishery is now, not where it is 10 years ago when they were catching 6 million pounds. I mean, we're down a factor. The commercial fishery between 2009 and 2019, down a factor of 10.
Right.
If that's not collapsed, I don't know what is.
Right, but we're already regulating ourselves. The fish aren't there. So by putting what Mead is saying is correct. By putting a season, by not opening until March, all we're going to do is when these fish rebound, is other states are going to benefit. The same thing happened with the tilefish when they couldn't land here, so they'd shoot offshore and just go into Maryland and land, and we just cut Virginia out. So the only thing we're going to do with this is hurt ourselves in the long run. I'm just not sure what direction to go with this, because where's our data from, back in the 80s, we never packed Croaker, and they rebounded all on their own to the 90s. So are we just in a slump? If we we're looking at season closures, I don't know if size limit isn't the better way to go, because we need the little fish to grow up.
And then I will say this, my guys are seeing them out there, and I'm getting the question, hey, can you sell them? They're kind of small, and we're all saying, all the guys at back trawlers are saying, no, leave them alone, let them get bigger, stay off of them for a while. So there are fish out there, and we're not catching them now because they're not big enough, and we want them to grow. So we are kind of self-regulating. It's not like they completely disappeared. Now, I will say this. I wasn't here then, but in the 60s or 70s, the only croakers on the East Coast came out of the Gulf. They didn't catch them we weren't catching them on the East Coast. They disappeared, and they came back on their own with no management. they've cycled out, they're going back away. Was it because of overfishing? I don't think so. There's still fish out there. They're just on the small side. I mean, right before the catch started to decline, the fish were huge, the biggest croakers anybody's ever seen on the East Coast. And then they kind of just started to go away. The fishing has slowed down. A lot of guys have moved on to other things. They're not catching them. They're too small. They're leaving them alone. They'll come back. The question's just when.
And we don't want to have stuff in place that doesn't allow us to catch them, because they're going to come back. Like Meade said in the 60s, and I didn't know what a croaker was in the mid 80s. So we got to be careful not to hurt ourselves in the future with whatever we do here. I mean, we've already taken, like Meade just said, we're reducing ourselves. Our boats are conch dredging or spiny dog shark fishing. They're not chasing little croakers. So we're doing other things. So we're taking our own reduction.
Yeah. This is Ludford. Can I jump in real quick? First thing I want to address, he said,
I can't hear you, Chris.
Yeah, you're cutting out a lot. So, Chris, you're cutting out. So
how about now?
You're a little
Can you
better.
hear me now?
Everyone
That's
else,
better.
I can just
All right.
stay muted.
Yeah, this is Ludford. I'll try again. So the gray trout comment Tom made about the 5 year, they were 5 years behind the collapse. The fish are 25 years behind the management in recovering. There has been it's been basically a moratorium, and it took the fish, they've taken their own sweet time about it. There's been no interaction. There's been no bycatch to keep them knocked back. This is something that Mother Nature has done on her time. So 25 years behind on that rebuild due to no fault from man, from fishermen, that is, potentially habitat maybe, I don't know, or predation, but that's one point. The other point is, if we're going to mention factors here that haven't been discussed, I just briefly want to throw one out there, not to consume time, but I would like to, and I might have to do a request. I hope it's not a FOIA request, but I would be curious as to how many new Maryland fishermen we have that hold Virginia licenses that are harvesting in Virginia waters and then transporting back to Maryland and selling them in Maryland. Now, I don't know if that's it's hurting us in both ways. It's hurting us in the catch, it's not being accounted for, and it's hurting our resources coming out of our waters. No different than the crabs.
That does happen to crabs. Yep.
So I'll leave it at that, and I'll go back to mute. And I may change computers to get a better audio.
I suggest everybody, for your best audio, use your phone for your audio and your computer for the video.
Are we all speechless as to what to do? I mean, if we use the last 2 or 3 years, the recreational would be near zero. So, I think we've all taken, I don't know if we're just going about this the right way. We're in a cut. We're taking a natural cut. We've, looking at what they want us to do, we've already done it. If we've got to take a 10-year average, we're in compliance doing nothing. Or other than implementing the mandatory 50 fish bag limit on croakers, but it still doesn't solve the problem.
Scott, what we can discuss, and Summers and I were trying to discuss while we were on mute. So per the addendum, we do have to use this 10-year average. However, I think if we can prove to the technical committee that it would be more conservative for us to use a more recent average, we may be able to convince them to let us use a shorter time frame commercially to take the 1% cut.
But
For
what are we talking, but
recreational, you have to take 50, or you can go smaller. You guys can literally pick whatever number you want for bag limits. 50 is what we have to take.
Right, but so the question is, what is the impact of taking a 50 or 40 fish bag limit for the recreational sector if you only look at the last 3 or 4 years? Instead of looking at 10 years, because 10 years ago, there was a good fishery. By the way, I pulled up the data from Maryland, and the Maryland fishery the last 3 years has stunk. They were up to 1 million pounds in 2012, and they're down to 3,000 pounds for 2019 for Croaker.
And on that same kind of trajectory, I bet if you looked at landings of spot in New Jersey and New York, they'd be the highest they've ever been in the last year or two, because they didn't catch them up there 10 years ago, but in the last couple of years they have. Just curious, just a thought.
There's nothing that we can do about the fact that the 10-year average is what they've asked us to use. I think we can do something for us as far as if you guys want to go more conservative and use a shorter time frame. I think that we could go to the TC and ask if that's possible and prove to them that it would be more conservative. We can't do anything about the other states.
right,
Based on what I've seen with what we've packed the last 2 or 3 years, it's just talking about spot right now. We saw an increase in spot this past year.
correct.
I think you stick with the 10-year average, see what happens over the next year or two with spot, and Croaker too, for that matter. I mean, they're saying 10-year average. I think that's what you got to stick with.
I agree. We don't want to go with the 2 or 3 year average because I don't see how we can get much more conservative than we are right now. We're not catching them. So if we go with the 2 or 3 year average and we are more restrictive, which I don't see how we can be, all we're going to do is hurt ourselves when these fish come back, and they're going to come back. Everybody who's been in this business a lot, we all know they're cycling. They will come back. And
I think the spot are already on their way back. The Croaker
correct.
might be a long cycle.
That's correct. The spot we saw more spot this year than we've seen in a long time. So yes, I agree. I think next year is going to be even stronger year. So we don't want to hurt ourselves. They're coming. So I don't think.
And as far as opening and closing the season on spot, you see where your landings are. They're in September and October. As long as you're open in September and October, you're good to go. They don't catch spot and trawlers and other. So I think you're good there. The Croaker's the only problem I have an issue with starting in March, just in case, they bounce back and, I don't know. I mean, we're not going to catch the quota or whatever the number is. We won't catch that this year anyway, based on what we're seeing.
Correct.
So let's pick a place to start here. So we've got either the recreational decision point up, but it sounds like we're talking a lot about commercial. So if we want to move on to talking about commercial, we can talk about what percentage you guys want to take for your commercial reduction, and then we can talk about the timing of what that season looks like. So I don't know where you want to start. If you want to start with recreational, we'll start there. If you want to start with commercial, we'll start there.
If you don't mind, start with recreational. I got to jump out for 5 minutes.
Okay. So let's start with the recreational. So again, we have to take at least a 50 fish bag limit. If this committee wants to be more conservative and take a more conservative bag limit, that can be discussed. I think this will give us a good starting point of deciding what sort of percentages you want to take for the commercial if we start here with the recreational and determine what the bag limits are that we want to see recreationally.
With the 50 fish bag limit recreational, does that apply to charter boats also?
So that's the second part of it. So per addendum 3, they are able to keep live bait before a trip.
Or
so
after.
It would be, or after a
Or
trip.
during.
Yeah, well, essentially.
Yeah.
So per the number of people that they have on their vessels, they can have 50 fish times the number of people on their vessel if they want to keep a live bait well before, during, after a trip. That's the allowance.
So,
Well, my
so
question.
one of the things,
Go ahead, Tom.
go ahead.
Okay.
One of the things that came up, go ahead, I'm sorry, go.
It wasn't charter boats using them for bait. My question is charter boats, like say boats on the Rappahannock that are taking people out spot fishing.
Yep,
How is that going to affect them?
So they've got the same bag limit, 50 fish a person.
50 fish per person. And there's no way around that. That's a done deal.
That is a done deal.
Okay.
You can go less. Again, you can go less. You can't go more.
Right. Well, if they increase, I don't think we want to go less. If the spot are coming back, we don't want to hurt the charter boats. I think we got to give them the max we can give them, because people aren't going to pay to go on a boat if they can only catch 25 spot. I think we have to think about them in this instance for those charters.
And that was when we went through this with the South Atlantic Board. That was one of our thoughts, was as this fishery starts to recover, having management actions in place that help it recover. Don't prolong don't prolong, a period of low abundance. And that's, the 50 fish is kind of like, it's putting some kind of a binder on it, sidebars on it. And that's all it was intended to do. It was to look at, as the fishery begins to recover, if people are still going out and you've got people keeping 100, 200 fish, and that's happening on a regular basis, it's going to take longer for the species to recover. And I think that was the whole premise behind what they were doing, was just trying to put some measures of protection on these species.
Right.
So, and everything else we have on here as far as the percentages are just showing what those percentages, those reductions would be in our waters based on the data, the Virginia specific data. But what we're required to do is a minimum of 50%, maximum of 50 fish limit for both species recreationally, and a 1% reduction in our overall commercial harvest.
Right. Well, that's what I'm saying. I think 50 is fair to leave that. I don't know if we want to be more restrictive, because that, I'm not saying more for charter boats, but I do think we need to consider them in this and leave it at 50 just for that reason. So we don't hurt charters. And that's being more restrictive than the 1%. It's giving you a 9% on, or whatever it was, 9% on spot. Yeah, 9.3 on spot. So I'm a fan. I mean, I don't have a dog in this fight, but I'm a fan of leaving it there for the charter boat industry, for guys that take people out to catch spot.
Well, the good news is at least as far as the traffic light approach, we have exceeded the 60% for the last 2 years from the recreational and commercial harvest, but we have not exceeded those values for the surveys. So both of those, the abundance composite, which is the surveys, and the harvest composite, which is recreational and commercial harvest, have to agree for something to occur, not one or the other. So, I mean, we're not in a situation with Croaker that in a year or so we're going to be above the 60%, over that 60%, because the fisheries independent component has not exceeded that yet. But I think spot's a little bit different though. Yep.
Okay, so Scott, it sounds like you're for 50 fish. How does the rest of the task force feel about 50 fish?
50 fish sounds right to me. That's Mead.
And I'd say 50 fish as well. One quick note is that I don't think we've gotten credit in the past for exceeding. I don't imagine or can't imagine that people have forgotten the cobia, spadefish, flounder, that in the effort of doing more, we've never gotten a return on doing more. We've been penalized later. It's never gotten Virginia benefit. Striped bass is another example right now where we've done more and Maryland's done less, and we continue to suffer.
Yeah.
There's just no need.
Yeah. To let you know, Maryland is looking at the 50 fish. Maryland already has a size limit in place, and when we talked last time, we all agreed that the size limit wasn't the way to go. But Maryland is they're looking at the 50 fish limit. That's what they're planning on doing.
And I appreciate that, but this is one case out of a lot that's not happened before. I mean, I know Maryland's had a croaker size limit for probably 15, 20 years. I'm not going to let them off the hook that way. It's just not going to happen. Not as bad as we've been beaten double black-eyed on flounder over the last 20 years. And I've been in this as long as anybody on this call. And you know, all these species, we try to do the right thing, and we never have gotten any credit for it, and it's never benefited us.
Okay. I mean, that's a good point, because we could go low. You know, we could go lower, and then basically they tell us we have to go lower again in the future.
Exactly. That's exactly what happened with cobia. We did these voluntary limits recreationally. Then when they came out with actual equations and numbers, they based them on our catches that were lower due to a self-imposed limit that we didn't have to take. And nobody thought about it at the time. When are we going to learn this lesson?
Okay. Tom, how do you feel with Tom? How do you feel about the 50?
I don't have sufficient data to know if it'll do any good or not, except for it'll make the people in ASMFC happy. I'm telling you, if we're going to do a reduction, it needs to be a reduction. If we're going to do a status quo because nobody catches 50 fish right now, then we're status quo, and we'll see what happens with the fish. I just worry that we're driving the fishery into the ground. Spot, I think, is more cyclical and more our fish, and that I don't believe that they migrate out of the bay and down the coast when they're young. And people, please correct me if I'm wrong, like croaker do.
Tom, just to let you know that when we met last time, which is I did a 5-year, which would have been I guess 2004 through 2008. 50 and below was 7%. It would have been a 7% reduction.
Okay.
So, in harvest, which is nothing. You know, that's it's pretty big. You know, that's a fairly good reduction if you look at the last 5 years.
And spot you're talking about?
No, I'm talking about croaker. Now, granted, that doesn't include 2019, and then the last 5 years for spot would have been it would have been a 15% reduction. So last 5 years. So yeah, you're right. I mean, those 10 years, when you look at those 10 years of commercial landings, it went from 6 million to 4 million, and then, several years to 3 million, and it's kind of really dropped down the last 3 years. That's why when you suggested 3 years, I'm like, I don't think 3 years is the right answer, because, we've already been in a major decline at that point. I mean, you could argue 5, but I think, going to 3 we went from 3 million to like 1.7 down to 500,000 pretty quickly. And to just use those 3 years is you're not really getting a good representation of the overall fishery over a time series. So.
Yeah, we definitely don't want to go with 3 years. We want to leave it like it is, because we're just going to hurt ourselves when they rebound. So I don't think we want to push that.
We ready for a motion?
If you guys want a motion, I would suggest you do a motion on recreational first, and then, because I think that's the easy one, and then we'll go to the commercial.
I'm ready to make a motion, Sludford.
Okay.
I'll make a motion that we go with the 50 fish bag limit for croaker and spot, and that we allow Virginia to negotiate for the best option for a charter captain allowance on live bait.
Okay.
It's my motion.
I'll second it.
What was on the live bait? I'm sorry. I found out if you touch your AirPods twice, it hangs up your phone.
It's just, the way I'm reading it, Tom, there's two on the recreational. One is obviously the bag limit. Two is a charter captain allowance that they're going to actually discuss at ASMFC. So my motion contains language that would let Virginia staff, Virginia representatives argue for the best deal for our charter captains to keep a live bait.
Yeah. So one of the things that shoot, what's his name? Freeman said, Chris Freeman maybe?
Bruce Freeman.
Okay, is the one that lives in Pocosin is what I'm thinking about. Is that he will go out catching bait by himself in his bait traps and frequently come home with more than 150 fish. You know, they're 2-inch fish, but how's he supposed to do that to make his charter living catching bait for his charter business? That's a tough question that you guys, that either we're going to be able to, I don't know the answer to that one.
Can I offer a suggestion?
Go ahead.
The suggestion would be for a licensed captain that has a six-pack license, 6-person boat, he would get to keep 300 fish. They could carry that to ASMFC. If it's a head boat and they've got a 20-person ticket, 20-person license, it would be 1,000 fish. They wouldn't do that, but it would be up to that for a live bait. Or you could just make it a 300 fish per captain live bait allowance.
So as a point of clarification, in the addendum.
It's already in there.
Yeah, it's already in there. So
It's already in there, guys.
It already allows that we can have language that says the charter captain is able to keep the number of fish by the number of customers allowed on the vessel multiplied by the bag limit. The caveat is that they must be alive. So if they plan on harvesting any of the fish like during a trip, they can't have additional fish to that live number.
That's fine. That's why I said, I thought that was in there. Just whatever staff can do to argue for that, to keep that language, to adopt that language was part of my.
Okay.
Yeah, Chris,
So,
that language is already that language is already in the commission's addendum. What we have to do is make sure that goes into our regulation, our Virginia regulation.
So let's be delusional here and say I happen to have a 30-foot boat, which I don't. I have a little 16-foot boat, but say I had a 30-foot boat and I've got 6 of my friends I want to take out all the time, but I don't have a charter license. They're just my friends. And yeah, we split gas. Don't make it mandatory because that would make it a charter. But we go out all the time like that. Can I get 300 little fish for bait and carry them around and have traps out there that I bring them back in with my skiff?
As long as they're kept alive.
Why not?
You'd each have to keep your own 50. You'd have to each have your own 50.
But they're live. They're live and they're for bait.
Sure, you each keep your own 50.
But I'm not but I want the same rules as a charter captain because I'm going out with 6 of my buddies on my 30-foot boat, my delusional 30-foot boat.
Come on, guys. Do we really got to make it difficult like this?
I don't think so.
No, but it's got to be fair for everybody. That's the point.
But a charter boat captain is not the same as a regular recreational fisherman.
And it's a delusional boat that you have.
Yeah, well, not my next door neighbor's boat. He's got
Right.
that boat.
Come on, Tom.
Come on, man.
Yeah, I mean, Tom, if you had a live well at your house and you got stopped by law enforcement and you had 100 fish in there and you said 50 of them was your next door neighbors, and that next door neighbor, they could knock on his door and he could show his fishing license, that would be fine.
Except for there are a lot of recreational fishermen that have a barrel out off their dock that they keep bait in that will want more than 50 in that. It's the same kind of rules we do for eels.
Well, I mean, basically, if they have, the wife has a fishing license, the son has a fishing license, that's 150. I mean, it's, you know,
Any rate,
that's the solution to that one.
I worry that, I think it should be a 50 fish limit, and catching bait is part of the problem. Catching them for bait. Dead discards on commercial fisheries is a problem. For example, in haul seines that are suffocated.
We don't have a commercial fishery anymore. It's not a problem.
You don't have haul seines out there?
I don't have a haul seine that catches croaker. And from my area, I don't have any croaker guys that catch them here.
I think that's what they're catching out here.
My pound netter on the Eastern Shore, Ed Brady, he didn't catch enough croaker for a fish fry last year, so he's not catching.
Yeah,
he's there.
Yeah, Scott, just to let you know that the haul seines for the state last year caught about 2/3 of the landings for the state.
Gotcha. Okay, but they're not in my area.
Yeah.
No, that's mostly over here on the west side of the bay.
Yeah, but it's still, they are the predominant. It's haul seines and pound nets and gill nets to the three gears that overwhelmingly catch the most.
Right.
Okay, so just to try to get back on track here. So it sounds like for the bag limits, we were doing 50 fish for both species. It sounds like that was, I mean, it's kind of hard because there's only 4 members here. So, but the motion was that the 50 fish, and it seems like everyone's okay with that.
Yes.
Correct me if I'm wrong. And then for number 2, it sounds like it's a 3-1 where, Tom, you're saying no, but the rest of you are okay with that?
Yes.
Okay, so let's move on to number 3. So this is the commercial portion. Hopefully, I don't remember who stepped out. Somebody stepped out.
Me did. I think he's back.
I'm back.
Okay, cool. Okay, so first we'll talk about the percentage. So what percentage do you guys support? Either the 1%, which is, we have to do that at least. So that's something we have to do, or if you'd rather do something greater than that.
I think it should be comparable to the percentage reduction that you're calculating for the recreational fishery, like you said in the beginning.
Yeah, I think 1% is more than enough because we're actually not catching that now anyway.
Correct.
But you're looking at a reduction not for this year, but for next year when they start to come back, or the year after that.
They're not.
But when they come back, we don't have a problem.
Yeah.
And Tom,
I think 1% on the commercial right now is all you need. That'll be fine.
I agree.
I'll go so far as to make a motion to go with the 1%.
The motion. But how do we achieve the 1% is going to be the question. I mean, we've already achieved it. We're down.
We still have to come up with an additional 1%, Scott.
So what we're presenting you by using that 10-year average is probably the least conservative that we can do. So like I was suggesting before, if you use a shorter time frame, it's going to be more conservative. So if we want to look at the 1%, what we'll do is we'll go by species and we'll look at the seasons that Summers has put together that achieves that 1% reduction.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, Pat, I realize we do have to do something. Sorry.
So now we're talking about opening and closing March and November. Is that right?
Yes.
Either or.
Or both. So you've got a couple of options up there. So for Croaker and Spot, you have options which you can either take a cut at the beginning and the end of the year, or you can just take it at the beginning, or you can just take it at the end. So just focus on the yellow boxes. You don't need to look at the green and the red. Just focus on the yellow boxes and discuss which of these seasons makes more sense for you guys.
There's red on this screen.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm having a real hard time seeing that too.
Okay, so just look at the where it says 1%. Don't look at the 10 or the 5.
Okay, I can do that.
Yep. Sorry, I forget about the color blindness.
My problem. And also,
No
it's really faded. It's a very faded color.
Hey, Mead.
Yeah.
So if neither one of us are a fan of any of this, but we have to do something on the Croaker, So we can just go the season closure of November 8th, and that'll get our 1%. How does that, that's not going to affect
The trawlers at all.
Yeah, is
It
that,
won't
if
affect-
that,
So, I mean, so here's the issue. The trawlers haven't caught any croakers in the last 3 or 4 or 5 years.
right,
And I'm trying to remember back when they were catching them, what time of year they caught the most. And usually it's when they're leaving the bay in the fall, they'll catch some down off the Carolinas, and then in the winter down there, they catch them. It's kind of the opposite of the Holstein season. And the only issue is if they come back and you got to wait 3 years to make any adjustment. You know, we passed this. When does this go in effect? 22?
We don't know yet. We don't know. We don't know.
It'll go into effect this year.
In March. Oh, depends.
okay,
If we do, yeah, if we pass the regulation, it will go into effect this year. By ASMFC standard, we don't know when it has to be implemented by. It's probably
But
going to be.
if we started this year, I mean, at any point during the 3-year period, could we go back and, well, I guess, I know the answer to that.
it would have to be for 3 years, Mead. So if it goes into effect for this year, do we feel like we can live with this for 3 years? Is the closing on the 8th the better of these 3 to where when they rebound, because you're talking, because it'll open back up January 1, correct? It's a calendar season.
Yes.
So
Yeah,
we're talking shaving off 7 weeks at the end of the season versus,
Yeah.
you know, that the March 2nd cuts out all the gill netting in the spring if they come back, which right now we could live with that because boats are doing, you know, they're spiny dog fishing. So,
Yeah.
but I think, you know, that was always our biggest time, was really the month
So
of
would
March.
the option of beginning/end of the year, where you March 19th, March 2nd, November 19th, that's if you combine the two?
Yeah, that's a combo of the two. So the season
that's a
would
good
start,
question.
it would open on March 2nd, and then it would
Oh.
close on the 19th. That's a combination.
Oh,
You
okay.
do either do the beginning or the end or the combination of the both.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. So we're trying to give you guys options so you can let us know what works best for you.
So if we just do the season open March 2nd, we could in effect catch croakers to December 31st.
Correct.
But if we go season in November, they can start catching croakers in January and February if they wanted.
Yep.
Correct.
Yes.
That's what I'm saying, Mead. What are we better off losing here? The end of November or January, February?
Yeah, I'm just trying to think, you know, I'd have to go back and look at all my landings to see, but it's been so long. I mean, it's kind of a moot point. I really don't see them bouncing back in the next 2 years. That's enough to go after them. Well, how does it work for you, Spot? I mean, will y'all start catching before March 2nd?
You know, on a mild year, we'd have them as early as Valentine's Day.
Yeah. Okay.
But that's a mild year, and we do have milder winters now. So yes, that could cut out 3 weeks in the spring for us. But really, March was probably our best month.
Okay. I see that.
And after November 8th, like we used to catch it. We go from spot to croaker. But now we go from spot to roundhead. Okay,
Yeah.
so if is there any bycatch in this? Because if we're roundhead fishing in November and we have croaker for a bycatch, do we not? You call them. Is there a bycatch allowance in this?
No, unfortunately not. It would just be the season. It would be a hard date.
Well, that's tough. I mean, the guys catching porgies and flounders still catch croakers once in a while mixed in with them. You go out here
Right.
and catch bluefish in November and December or something like that, you're going to have some croakers mixed in them.
Right, because right behind the spot, we do get that little croaker on. So we might be better off with this spring being closed because we didn't catch them. But what do the draggers do in January? February?
Well, you know, right now they're working on fluke in November and December. In the last several years, they've been working on fluke. So, and they're catching those north of here, not straight out of here. You know, damn if you do, damn if you don't. I would think I'll let you make it. Well,
But see,
I would rather it open March 2nd, actually.
But if we pick that, then it'll already. What about the people up on the eastern shore, Chincoteague area? The fish will be past them.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why I wish I wish Ernie were here. We need somebody from the eastern shore to let us know.
He is here. We can definitely.
I would like his opinion on this because I don't know what that's going to do to the eastern shore in the spring of the year. What they catch. I mean, I'm kind of leaning towards November 8th. So we're the opposite ends of me, but I'm not sure what's right or wrong here.
Hey, we can go ahead and, if you guys want to take a pause, if you want to do some public comment prior to making this decision.
Please, I'd like to talk to Ernie.
Okay. Yeah. Let me get
I want to
Ernie
talk to Jimmy Rule too.
Right.
I have a fish question about closing in the beginning of the season or in the end of the season as one or the other. Isn't it, if you close in the beginning of the season, you're allowing the fish a chance, because these are fast-growing fish on both species. You're allowing the fish to become a more marketable product and grow bigger and potentially have a chance to spawn? Or is it spawn is not part of this question? But the point being, if we don't harvest in the spring early, if we let them go an extra month in the spring, they'll grow more and we'll have bigger fish.
Actually, let me to that point, Scott, let me ask you if you remember this. About 10 years ago when they were catching those real big croakers and gill nets pretty far out in the ocean, they were rowing out there, weren't they?
Typically the spring ones are skinny because they've been running some stuff all winter. The spring croaker are always skinny that come in the bay. They're all head. When
they leave here in the fall, they're full of roe, and they go offshore and push that roe out, right?
Yes, that's what I would think. Yes, we'd have to ask Myra on that.
So from a biological standpoint, you'd probably be better off to lay off of them in the fall than you would in the spring, because by the spring they've already spawned.
Correct.
And you're right. When they come in here in the spring, they're what we call is poor.
Right.
It looks like it's a big fish, but they don't weigh out because there's no meat on them.
Correct. So you're right. We're probably better off that way. How do we get? I know Ernie's in the audience. No, how do we get Ernie?
I was going to let you guys have public comment, but I was letting y'all speak for a minute. So
I'm sorry.
I've got Ernie. If you hold on just a second, I'll get him unmuted.
Sure, I can do it, but.
There you go, Ernie. You should be able to talk now.
Oh, you can hear me all right?
Yeah, there you are.
Good go.
A few things. Croakers actually spawn in October, and they're usually too far offshore to catch. But that was on your last comment. And on Spot's comment about croakers and stuff, we used to catch a lot of them in November years ago, but we haven't in a good while. They used to catch a lot in Virginia Beach and in February and March, and they haven't done that either. So I don't know exactly what Spot wanted. He wanted to ask me something, but I don't know particularly what it was.
If y'all have a spring fishery prior to March.
Spring fishery.
A spring fishery.
As far as croakers, we never really ever caught many here before the end of April.
Okay, so March wouldn't affect the eastern shore. So
March won't affect the eastern shore.
March will not affect the eastern shore at all. We usually, when I used to have a lot of croakers, I would start croaker fishing most of the time around the 20th of May. We'd have enough to work on. But lately here, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, we had quite a few in May. But that's unusual. We've never had them earlier than the end of April. In my recollection, than 50 years of fishing.
Okay.
So Ernie, would you say that you've caught them as late as mid to late November before?
Oh, yes. I've done very well when we used to catch croakers and trike together, where we catch them in November, and we would still be catching them when the rockfish showed up. But lately it hasn't been that way. For some reason, the croakers are staying way offshore even in the summer. The charter boats get in them when they go off tile fishing. They usually find them in about 120 or 30 foot of water. And why they're off there, I don't know. They don't come underneath the beach anymore.
So back to, from a biological standpoint, like me said, if they spawn in the fall, we're probably better off than closing November 8th and leaving the spring open.
I think, for the general public, you'd be better off leaving the spring open because you have trawlers work on them. You could have the people when they're coming in to the bay to recover working on them, and everybody gets a shot at them. Somebody's going to lose some of their best time. You're going to keep some of it. And that's what you need to do, compromise so everybody has, some of their best and some of their worst.
All right. Well, I mean, since we're not catching a whole lot right now with trawlers, and we probably won't for a couple of years, and the biology of it would suggest we'd be better off laying off of them in November, I would make a motion for the croaker fishing to reach 1% to close at the end of the year, November 8th.
And I'll second the motion.
And we're still, just to clarify, are we still with the 1% for both species?
Yes.
Okay. And then what about for spot?
Let's look at this. The bottom is red, so we want to look at the top again, right? 1%.
That's right.
So basically, May 2nd for beginning of the season, November 29th for end of the season.
If that's what you want to go with, those are your two options. So if you want to take the cut from the beginning of the year, your season would open on May 2nd. If you want to take your cut from the end of the year, your season would close on the 29th. If you want to do both, you've got that option at the top of opening on April 15th, closing on December 6th.
I would say end of the year, November 29th would be, looking at this, what I would go with. What do you think, Meade?
If you did the combination of April 15th and December 6th on this one, have you ever packed spot before April 15th? I do remember a couple times we had spot around Thanksgiving. It doesn't happen very often, but we have had spot around Thanksgiving. It's rare. I know we've never had spot around December 6th, though.
Yeah, I'm looking at the numbers now. It looks pretty rare before, April and earlier, and in November and beyond.
Yeah, I don't usually first week in November for us, and I'm not sure about. I'd have to ask Ernie on that as far as the Eastern Shore in April, because we do start getting some stuff off the Eastern Shore in the spring of the year. But I think it's in May. I don't think it's in April. So I think we could live with that one, Meade, if you think that one's better to go to April 15th through December 6th. But I'd like to hear from Ernie on this one also about April 15th if they catch them prior to that.
Let you in.
All right. I'm on again.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes, sure.
All right. We seldom catch any before April the 15th, and if you do, they're tangled up because they're extremely small. They would probably run less than a third of a pound. So we usually don't catch any spot until the middle of May at the earliest.
Okay. You think that one's better, Meade?
I don't know. I mean, you pick one half dozen the other on this one. We never see them over here in the as early as April or that beginning of May, either one. But I know there's been once or twice we've seen them in late November, coming around, Buckrow and over there at Ocean View, and it's rare, but it does happen. I'd rather go with either the season opening May 2nd or the split season April 15th, December 6th.
I could do the April. I think we want to open before the 2nd of May.
Okay.
So I think maybe the April 15th to December 6th.
Yeah, so,
And I guess there's nobody else on here commercial that has an opinion on this.
Chris?
We can take some time to take public comment if y'all would like.
Yes, I would.
So if folks who are attending as a member of the public, if you would like to make comment on this option, please use the chat function at the bottom of your screen to chat in and let us know that you'd like to talk. I've got one other person on the phone that I'm going to unmute, but first, if folks are on and would like to speak, please let me know at the bottom of the screen. Okay, I'm going to unmute the other phone caller because I don't have anyone who's using the chat function. So hold on just a second. We'll check with him. I know that's Charles. Charles, is there anything that you would like to make on public comment for this issue?
Just a spot. I'd go with April the 15th to December the 6th on that, and the Croaker's fine.
Okay.
If there are no other comments, I'll make a motion for the spot to reach the 1% to go with the beginning and end of the season, April 15th, December 6th.
Hold on, I've got one person.
Oh, sorry, we have one person that would like to speak, one more person.
Okay, Scott Weibel, I see you've got your hand raised. Scott, would you like to speak on this topic? If you are trying to speak, we do not hear you. You are unmuted. All right, I've got nothing from Scott. He might be having computer issues. I will send him a chat and see if he needs some help. Go ahead, sorry.
I'll second the motion that Mead made.
Okay, so I'm just gonna work up a slide really quick that has everything that we have decided, and then we can again open it to public comment. Okay, so again, if you are a part of the public and you would like to make a comment, either recreational or commercial or about anything that we've talked about, please do write your name in the chat box at the bottom. There should be a speech bubble labeled chat. You can just write your name down there, and then we will call on you and unmute you. You can also alternatively message directly BMRC staff, the host, and we can get it that way as well.
I've got one.
Okay, we have one so far.
Hold on just a moment. Okay, so the person who has signed up for public comment has actually left. Scott Weibel would like to comment. He is having a hard time with his audio, but he wanted to say that he says that the fish are not coming inshore to the beaches. In order to really catch croakers, you have to go 30 plus miles offshore to 100 plus feet of water to find them. And that's the comment that he wanted to make. Just unfortunately, we can't hear him. If there's anybody else who would like to make comment, I see there's still several members of the public online. Once again, if you just use the chat function at the bottom of the screen to let me know that you'd like to speak, I will go ahead and unmute you. All right, I've got a Jason Lewis. Jason, I'm going to unmute you right now. And you can go ahead and address the committee. Yep, we should be able to hear you.
So on the spot bait fishery, there's a few captains up here like Fish Point and stuff on the shorter side of things. How would that affect them on the bait side? We said it was going to be a 50 per person, or?
Jason, you're kind of far away from your phone. If you could get a little bit closer and restate your question.
This better?
A little bit. Not by much.
Are we on speakerphone? Maybe take it off speakerphone.
Any better?
Yeah, that's better, a little better.
Okay, we were talking about y'all were talking about the shorter bait side of the spot industry. I know several captains here that don't necessarily run charters, but still catch the bait spot to sell to recreational fishermen. Is that still a 50 per person, or how does that work?
Yeah, the recreational bag limit would be, if you're a charter captain but not using it for bait for a charter, would be 50 fish per person.
Okay, so I have a commercial fish pot license, which allows me to catch the small spot and sell them to the recreational. How would that come into effect?
So you have a commercial fish pot license, yes, is what you're saying?
Yeah, I didn't hear you. What did you say?
You have a commercial license is what you're saying. You would fall under the season is what we're showing for commercial. You would fall under that season. So that would be what would apply to you as a commercial fisherman.
Okay, so it would just all be lumped together under the commercial.
Okay, so he harvests spot commercially and legally and with a commercial limit of unlimited fundamentally. And then I go in with my mythical 30-foot boat and say, I want to buy 300 spots from you to go out, and I'm a recreational fisherman. I have those 300 spots. I have a receipt saying I legally bought them from a commercial fisherman. Do I get a ticket?
If he's giving you live bait, Tom,
I'm buying it from him.
Right. You're going out on your boat that day, hold on your boat in the live well. You are only allowed to have 50 fish per the number of people times the number of people that you are taking out.
But I bought this bait. I bought it
legally. On your boat. You can buy it.
I bought it.
To take it out that day, it needs to be times the number of people that you have on your boat that day. That's what the FMP says.
You can buy 1,000 off them, but all you can have is 50 per customers. That's what they're saying, Tom.
Yep. In your live well, per the FMP, that's what they have.
Jason.
Yep. Jason, does that answer your question as a commercial fisherman?
Yes, ma'am. Good to go.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Again, if there's any other public comment, just put a comment or a chat at the bottom, and we will unmute you. Okay, we're seeing no more. So does the task force have any other Items they'd like to bring forward before we adjourn?
I'm good.
Okay.
Okay, so the next steps for this, guys, are we need to take this information to ASMSC, essentially show them the methodology, and make sure that they're okay with all of this. We are going to, because you're a task force, we're also going to reach out to FMAC and let them know what decisions were made tonight, obviously, since you're kind of a branch of FMAC. But ASMFC will need to essentially okay our implementation plan, which would include the recommendations that you all have made tonight.
And then we will bring this to the commission at the commission meeting in March. So if you would like to provide further public comment based on the conversations tonight, please do join that meeting. All of that information will be on the agency calendar on our website. It'll be obviously an online meeting as well.
All right, well, hearing no other comments or questions, I think we are ready to adjourn. We don't necessarily have a chair of this meeting, but thank you all for all of your input today. It's been really helpful. We appreciate it. And again, always feel free to reach out and let us know if you have any other comments or questions. And we'll be in touch with all of you.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.
Thank you for your time, staff. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.